Thank you all for being here today, and welcome to today's event. I hope the cloudy weather here in the UK is not the only reason you joined us, because we've got great speakers coming ahead. And speaking of speakers, we are delighted to host some of the great young professionals working in different sectors as part of the energy transition. They are handpicked to try and present a complete outlook on where we are on the energy transition nowadays. So let's introduce our first speaker. Rishi Duray is a strategy advisor in BP's Strategy and Sustainability Division. He joined the company as a geoscientist in 2012. During his first 7 years with BP, Rishi worked in the upstream business on exploration and production projects across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. In 2019, he transitioned into the strategy and sustainability framing of BP's net zero ambition. Rishi is also a One Young World ambassador, where he co-leads BP's global One Young World program. Rishi holds a master's degree in petroleum geoscience from Imperial College London. Without further ado, Rishi, off to you.
Leith, thank you very much. And thanks to yourself and Davis for pulling this event together. I think you've done a really stellar job. And I know a lot of effort's gone into actually rallying everything together. So thank you, and it's a pleasure to participate. Let me just start by sharing my screen. Just give me a moment. Has that come through okay?
Yes, you can see it.
Perfect. Well, in that case, so again, thanks everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Leith introduced, my name is Rishi Duray, and I work for BP in our strategy and sustainability team. And I've actually had the privilege of working right at the heart of our transformation journey in the last 18 months or so, particularly in our push to have a net zero ambition, on our new strategy to actually deliver on the ambition, and on our sustainability frame, which is at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. So I'm really excited to share some of my perspectives with you all today. I think I've got about 10 minutes, so I'm happy to take any questions later. And I think there is a Q&A session, but I'll jump straight in. So I think in terms of the agenda, I'm going to spend most of the time, I think, just talking about a career story. I think that was the request from the team. And then I've got a few slides also just sharing some of the outputs of what I've been involved in over the past couple of years or so. So I'm happy to run through them. I may just select a few slides as we go through, but I'm going to bias most of my time to actually just talking about my own career journey and the transition that I've embarked upon in recent years. So if I start with my career story so far, so in terms of my early geoscience years, I guess my journey began with this industry when I chose to study geology at university. I think for me, I was very attracted to the way that geoscience brought together all of the sciences and the ability to actually just solve these 3D problems, some amazing problems. And I think from early on at that point, it felt like my path had really been set. I thought, I'm a geologist and I'm entering the oil and gas industry, and that will define what I want to do. And so at that point, I joined BP straight after my master's. And I really enjoyed putting some of the theory that you learned at university into practice. I think there were some fantastic opportunities. Leith mentioned a few of those as well, where you can see on the slide there, I had the chance to work across the upstream life cycle from exploration to production, and that ranged, everything from new country access all the way to the production of supergiant fields, which was the Rumaila field where I started off working on Iraq when I first joined BP. And so that spanned both conventional oil and gas and also unconventionals too, across many different geographies and different basin types. So it was a really enjoyable time. There was a lot of variety, lots of different projects to get stuck into. And I think, like most in our industry, I spent the majority of my career so far working in E&P. And in my case, that was 7 years. And I know for many, that's a lot longer. And so I guess, so what happened next? So I had a huge amount of pride in my role in the upstream. I think the value of our activities, what we were adding to people's lives in the parts of the world that we were bringing some of these projects in, I felt a deep sense of pride on the positive impact that this was having. and the real impact that energy actually has in lifting people out of poverty. We've seen that with our industry for almost a century now, or for over a century. But I think at the same time, I was keen to continue driving more impact myself. I wanted to encourage myself to get out of my comfort zone a bit more, to learn some new skills along the way. And I was really looking for a way to craft myself a path to actually do this. And I think in particular to engage on our efforts in the energy transition, which were ramping up at the time. And so I think in BP, and as I think is also the case with all companies, there are so many things going on that I think if you push hard enough, you can create yourself the opportunity to actually get involved. And so in my case, I organized myself a secondment with the group strategy team at the time in what was called the carbon management team. And I initially set myself up a 3-month secondment project. And so it was a bit of a risk-free, go try something, and then you come back to the old job and continue. And on that project, I was asked to essentially build a model of BP's carbon emissions across the world. And this was kind of an upstream and downstream, and what we previously called our alternative energies division, which had our wind and solar businesses. And it was looking across scopes 1, 2, and 3. So for those who know about carbon emissions, that's kind of looking at both your operational emissions and also the emissions that come from the use of your products, which actually, when we think about net zero, is the key number for our industry in particular, just because that number is a lot bigger than the emissions associated with operations. And so that task, I think, was to really just frame what might be possible in the spirit of thinking about a push to net zero. And I think at the time, I did the project and it got presented to the executive team at the time. And I think, that was a real catalyst for some of the work that followed. And I managed to use that to convert the secondment into a full-time job offer in the team. And so that was great. I was really excited to embark on this new challenge. And soon after that, we had the announcement of our new incoming CEO. So Bernard Looney was announced. And at the time, Bernard was very keen to lean into the transition, to really lean into net zero and look into what BP could do at the time. And so he convened a team. It was a multidisciplinary team, as is the case with most things in our industry. I think there were about 12 of us in that team. And we were tasked with really getting to the heart of what it would take to get BP to net zero. How would we go about doing it? How would we thrive in doing so? How would you capture the huge business opportunity that actually comes with leaning into the energy transition? Because I think this isn't, this isn't just about the move to low carbon. This is also because this is a massive opportunity for our industry. We've got a lot of skills to capitalize on to actually thrive in this space. And we really need to think about how it can create value. And so we did a lot of this work. I think it was a pivotal moment for both BP and I think also for my career in shaping many of the things I've done since. And so, I've got a few slides that follow, which I'll try and take you through. But this essentially gave us the confidence to communicate our net zero ambition, which we did last year in February. We then embarked upon the creation of our new strategy and also our sustainability frame as part of this whole reinvention of the company to deliver on this. So it was a turning point, and as I said, I'll talk you through it on some of the next slides that follow. But I think just before I move on, also I'm keen to just acknowledge also the role of extracurriculars in your day-to-days. And so for me, I'll maybe pick on one example, which is One Young World. So Laith mentioned One Young World. So what is it? So One Young World it's a forum for young leaders that brings together leaders from all walks of life, and it's all about collaborating to drive solutions on some of the world's most pressing issues. So that's in the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I was first selected to join a BP delegation to attend a One Young World Summit back in 2017. And I found it incredible at the time because it's just, the inspiration you see from the parallels to how we embark upon a problem, if you think about the energy transition or climate change, One Young World just has a lot of parallels there. It demonstrates the value of people coming together to solve problems, how we're all stronger as a group, how everyone has something to bring to the table. And it really inspires you to go about your own journey. And so I think that played a key role for me in wanting to think about how can I use my company as an amplifier for change, because we all want to have a positive impact in our day-to-day lives. And you know, we can all do a lot as an individual, but if you do something with a company with the resources at your available to you, you can just achieve so much more. And so that was really a driver for me to go on my own, you know, purpose-led impact journey. What do I want to achieve, and how do I want to shape a path to actually get there? And so that was, for me, it was a major catalyst in wanting to embark on this journey, and a real driver in why I tried to embark upon some of these opportunities. And I think, you know, on career transitions itself, to some extent, I feel I've been very lucky. But I think you also make your own luck in this space too. We've all got opportunities to shape our careers. I think we need to remember that, and we all work or will or can work for companies where these opportunities exist. And if they don't exist, you can create them. So, you know, don't feel labeled like, you know, you start your career in one job and that's the job that you spend all the way through. That's absolutely not the case. But I think at the same time, you know, you should and can be proud of your technical disciplines, your backgrounds, your foundations, be that in oil and gas or whatever else. I think the world is going to need all types of energy for many decades to come. And so I think all of these skills will be very useful wherever you or we choose to apply them. I think for BP, we see our oil and gas business actually as the real engine room. We describe it as the engine room that actually makes our transition possible, because ultimately we wouldn't be able to ramp up the investments in our low carbon businesses without the cash that gets thrown off from our oil and gas business. So I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact that you can influence the energy transition whichever part of the business you work in. So I think everyone plays a role, and this is a transition. It's not a binary switch, because I think we're quite guilty in our industry actually in really amplifying the new without always acknowledging our history and our present. And so don't let that sampling bias, you know, almost polarize your views in this, in how we approach this challenge. And I think for those of you, you know, looking to transition, for me, some of the key things will be to remember that your technical background actually brings a spectrum of skills. It's not just your label. You have other capabilities and soft skills relevant both to oil and gas and to low and zero carbon, you know. And I'll give you some examples for geologists. So as a geologist, sure, people say geology rocks, but actually geology is a lot more than rocks. It's your ability to understand and develop new plays and new business opportunities, in handling uncertainty, in describing complex 3D problems or even 4D problems, if you think about the time dimension, and really driving consensus and business decisions and creating value. So, you know, that's one example, and every discipline comes with its own bucket of skills that you can apply here. So I think it's these same skills that actually enable us to locate and produce hydrocarbons, could be used in reverse with CCUS to put the carbon back in the ground. The same skills that enable subsea engineering projects for oil and gas platforms can be used for offshore wind. I think that's the reason our industry is really advantaged when it comes to thriving in the energy transition. It's the skills and capabilities that we already have that can be unlocked. So I think understand your potential and leverage those skills and shape a pathway that's right for you. And I think just finally on this slide, and I'm conscious I may have already reached time, so I won't go any further on this, but I've put a LinkedIn QR code up on the slide as well. I love to engage with others on their journey. I think we've got a lot to learn together, and our industry more than any other is built on the spirit of partnership. So keen to connect, keen to collaborate, and look forward to staying in touch with you all. And I will hand back to Aith and Davis.
Thank you very much, Rishi. It's obviously evident that sort of transition and sort of shifting gears and trying something new is something that you really like, and that's wonderful for us to hear. And I think we made just a perfect start for our event. But moving onwards, I would like to introduce our second speaker tonight. Asmani Kardaki is a climate change legislation consultant at European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. specializing right now on climate law and sustainability. Asemania previously worked as an energy analyst at Burroughs & Co. in Lisbon, but prior to that, she also obtained a master's degree in international oil and gas law and policy from the University of Dundee. In fact, during her MSc studies, she was also the leading member of a collaborative project with the UN on the development of an energy and climate change toolkit. It's worth to mention that Asemani also holds a BSc in Geology and Geoenvironment from the National and Capodocian University of Athens. So, Asemani, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Davis. Thank you very much, you and Leith, for organizing everything and for inviting us to participate in this event. I will try to share my screen. 1 second. I hope you can see it. So I'm very excited. I will have the opportunity to share with you my career transition so far. I will try to take you through from the beginning as a geologist, and then explain how I shifted to net zero and focusing on the energy transition and climate change. So I will start with a brief introduction of what I've done. So I studied geology and geoenvironment in Greece at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens in Greece. And I did my thesis on the review of the legislative framework for hydrocarbon exploitation compared with the environmental protection requirements of marine areas in Greece. And this was when I realized that I'm really interested on the legal aspect of oil and gas and energy in general. So I decided to move to the UK and study law. And I moved to London, and I completed the graduate diploma in law at the University of Law in Guildford in 2018. And then I really knew that I wanted somehow to combine these two disciplines, combine law with geology and especially energy. So I started my LLM on international oil and gas law and policy at the University of Dundee. And at the same time, I started working on the Climate Change Toolkit project, which was a collaborative project between the United Nations and the University of Dundee. And our focus there was to develop a database of countries' legislation and regulations on climate change, renewable energy, sustainability, to support the United Nations intended purposes for the annual climate change negotiations. So what we were basically doing, we were trying to identify all the different legislation from all around the world focusing on climate change and sustainability and renewable energy to support United Nations identify any gaps or challenges these countries are facing, and how they can support them in developing further their focus on these aspects of energy and of the sector. And then I was selected to present the outcome of this project at the Oil and Gas and Just Transition Initiative Conference in Trinidad and Tobago in March 2019, which was an amazing experience for me. I had the opportunity to meet so many people from the industry from all around the world. And it was amazing how everyone to see how everyone is very interested in the energy transition, how these can be just and how these can be inclusive to everyone. So all these project, my master's, my experience on that made me really interested in learning more and gaining more experience on how climate change is affecting the environment, is affecting our sector, what we can do about it. So I decided to do my dissertation focusing on different pathways to achieve just energy transition. And at the same time, I was working voluntarily as the team leader on a renewable energy model drafting project, which was our initiative to develop a model act for renewable energy for countries to use it in order to develop their own renewable energy acts and use it as a basis for their law. To develop it further in accordance with their needs and characteristics, their country's needs and characteristics. And then we started a Sustainability and Just Transition Energy Society for the University of Dundee, which I was the secretary for until I graduated from the LLM. And it was a great experience because we had the chance to organize many events, trips, training modules, which was dedicated to the students, of course, but everybody else who was interested in learning more about sustainability and just transition. And yeah, this was really nice experience to be part of. And then I moved to Lisbon, as Davis mentioned briefly in the beginning, to work as an energy legal analyst for Barro's company. This was another very interesting experience because we were trying to analyze the energy markets in many different countries, especially in Africa and Asia, which are very different from what we are used to here in the UK or the EU. And our aim was to provide detailed analysis to investors for them to help them in their investment decision process, to identify in which countries they should invest, in which type of energy they should invest. And it was very surprising to see that it's not only coal and oil and gas as we might expect, but these countries are also trying to develop renewable energy, solar panels, wind farms. And it was really good to see how these jurisdictions are approaching this topic. And then I came back to the UK and I started working as a climate change legislation consultant for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And I also did the legal practice course, which is part of my qualification as a solicitor in the UK. So in regards to my experience as a climate change legislation for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, environmentally sound and sustainable development is central to the EBRD's mandate. So I started as part of the legal transition team. A part of this team is focusing on sustainability and climate change. And what we are basically doing is aiming to advance policy, legal and regulatory reforms in the power and energy sector, environment, climate change in emerging markets that the bank is investing in, and help companies in the same countries enhance their climate governance, disclosure, management of climate related risks and opportunities as part of the energy transition and the net zero and the net zero targets they are committing to achieve. So all these are part of the EBRD's green economy transition approach, which was updated in 2020 because of COVID. It became more ambitious and it aims to help emerging markets build green, low carbon and resilient economies. The EBRD is committed to increase green financing to more than 50% of annual business volume by 2025. And at the same time, they aim to reach the net annual greenhouse gas emissions reductions of at least 25 million tons by 2025. This is very important, I would say, because for a development bank investing in emerging markets, which very much rely on fossil fuels and stopping to invest in fossil fuels and starting to invest in green energy, low carbon, resilience and sustainability, it's a big sign that things are somehow changing. So as part of that and as part of this transition, I would say that everyone is affected. Governments are affected. All the parties of the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, are required to submit their national determined contributions and achieve these objectives. There is a rapid increase in the number of governments that are committing to become climate neutral by 2050, such as the UK, the EU. They are committed to become climate neutral by 2050, Sweden by 2045, huge emitters like the US and China by 2050 and 2060, which is an amazing goal to achieve. And then companies are also required to engage and adapt to a changing policy and investment landscape, and they need to evolve in ways that it will not only support decarbonization, but it will actually contribute to the decarbonization of the economy. Financial institutions are also increasingly lending and investing capital into activities that drive deep decarbonization. They invest in green technologies, nature-based solutions that will reduce emissions in the future. So we see that a lot of things are changing and everyone is affected. And of course, it is important to mention that the COVID-19 crisis has been a genuine opportunity to spur the net zero transition further. It is considered to be like a starting point for countries starting to develop their economies from the beginning. I would say they have to start becoming more sustainable, focusing on net zero, and all the recovery packages are directed to that goal on sustainability. So it was a big step. And of course, this transition brings a lot of risks for everyone, governments, investors, financial institutions, for all of us. But at the same time, it brings a lot of opportunities and has the potential to lead to a huge increase in the number of jobs. The clean energy employment will increase. It's expected to increase by 14 million by 2040, with jobs focusing on adaptation to climate change, limiting greenhouse gas emissions, improving energy efficiency, and many, many more. And I truly believe that these are all sectors that we are relevant with, and we have knowledge on with our backgrounds and our previous experience and knowledge. And it can only be like a good thing for us and a good opportunity for us to develop it further. And then it's also a historic, the net zero transition, it's also a historic investment opportunity for investors to decide to invest in green activities, green products. This is growing more and more every day. And that there is a huge number of leading companies, governments, investors committing to net zero and embracing the opportunity to drive innovation and increase competitiveness. So I would say that it is an evolving world, and new trends are being developed every day. There are many challenges, many risks, but at the same time, it's a very interesting area to work in. There is something new that you can learn every day, something new that you can read about. It's not something that happened many years ago and you're just reading about it, or something that might happen in the future. We are part of the change, of the transition, and this is very, very exciting to be living in. And yeah, in terms of like how I found this transition, I think that being adaptable, flexible, and open to new opportunities is a great tool. Is what you can do is plays a very important role on how things will progress. And as Rishi mentioned, I also believe I was lucky. I was lucky because I started working on a project that really made me realize how important everything is and how things are changing and how important climate change is. But at the same time, I was open to new opportunities. I said, I'll try it. I don't mind if I'm studying oil and gas law. I will see how things go, what this new opportunity can bring me. And being open-minded and open to new opportunities can only bring you more and more interesting things to learn, more skills for you to use in your career and your everyday life. So yeah, just be fearless and do your best. And thank you very much for your attention and for inviting me. And I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the speakers. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Asamania. I have to say, great animation and such a unique career path. That was a great outlook of legislation side of things and very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure you will have plenty of questions, so be ready. We already received some. And yeah, just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, please send them to the chat. Now let's turn our attention to our next speaker, Elhans. Elhans is a graduate reservoir engineer at Equinor. Prior to this, he also worked for Trident Energy, focusing on offshore field development projects. Elhans holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in petroleum engineering from the University of Manchester and Imperial College, respectively. Elhans conducted his thesis in CO2 injection, which unveiled his true interest in energy transition. Elhans currently serves as SPE's Young Professional Chair of the Troham section in Norway. Off to you, Elhans.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Laid and Davis, for inviting us to present today. So I would like to share my screen. Yes, hope you can see my screen. Then yes, let's get started. So my name is Elhans, and today I'm going to. So the outline of this presentation is going to be: first, I would like to introduce a little bit about myself, about kind of my energy journey so far. Then I would like to talk about kind of to take a little closer look to my experience with CCS and projects I have done at the universities. And then at the end, I will talk a little bit about Equinor's energy transition, how I'm involved, and about few projects what we are currently doing here in Equinor. And here you can see kind of a general diagram of kind of the energy transition. So here we can see that like oil platform producing gas, which after goes to the refinery, and from here we can collect CO2 and permanently stored in the subsurface. And also we can extract hydrogen, which later can be used for power generation, for heat, for maritime transport, and many more uses. Yes, then let's start from I would like to introduce myself. So I'm coming from Latvia, and then in 2014 I moved to UK to study my petroleum engineering degree at the University of Manchester. Then in 2016, and kind of every summer before, I was trying to get some internships in upstream oil gas industry, but it was quite hard. And I found an opportunity back home to work as a process engineer in the company called VNT, which is a crude oil and petroleum product storage company, and which is part of Vitol Group. Then in 2018, I started my master's degree in petroleum engineering at Imperial College London, and I was sponsored by Equinor. And then I did my master thesis in Norway, which I will talk later about. After finishing my master's degree, I started to work as a reservoir engineer in the company called Trident Energy in London. And after 8 months, I decided to move to Norway to start my graduate position as a reservoir engineer in Equinor. So kind of my first time when I heard and started to think and learned about CCS was actually my final year project during my foundation year at the University of Manchester. It was a group project, and the aim of this project was to consider a possible scenario of CO2 capture from the high emission source and find a potential place to store it. So our group needed to find kind of a high emitting source in the UK, then do a little bit of research how actually we can collect the CO2, and at the end where we can store it. And back then in 2015, the second largest CO2 emitter in the UK was Eggborough Power Station, located in the North Yorkshire. And actually preparing this presentation last week, I found out that this plant was decommissioned in 2018. And then our group, we were analyzing some seismic images at the BGS website, and we found out that nearby, 70 kilometers away, there is a Hunmarby oil and gas field. And kind of with the help of our supervisors, yes, we decided that yes, it's kind of a good and potential storage place for the CO2. So this kind of my first introduction to the CCS, and later on I just kept this interest. And my master's thesis was about CO2 EOR and storage potentials in depleted reservoirs in Norwegian continental shelf. And 1 year later, we have presented this paper at SP Europec, and you can find this paper online. So the aim of this project was to create a development scenario and find an optimum CO2 water injection strategy to maximize CO2 storage and oil recovery from the depleted reservoirs. And methodology I have used in this project was firstly to kind of understand the mechanisms behind CO2 water injection strategies, understand how actually they are sweeping oil from the injector to the producers. And then using this knowledge, I moved to the field scale 3D reservoir model. Briefly, I would like to discuss actually what was the development scenario. So kind of for the timeline of 50 years, we started at the depleted reservoir where the reservoir pressure is quite low, and we start to inject gas at a constant rate of 20 million tons per year from some source, from some power plant in Norway. We haven't performed any economic evaluations. So for the first 10 years, all producers are shut in, and we injecting CO2 into the reservoir. Then for the next 40 years, we start producing and reinjected, and the produced gas is back reinjected into the reservoir. And our conclusion was that this innovative development scenario proved to be technically viable to improve oil recovery and storage capacity in the depleted reservoirs. And the best strategy was cyclic simultaneous water and gas injection, as you can see in this plot. So on the y-axis, you can see the cumulative oil production versus CO2 stored. And you can see that cyclic simultaneous water and gas injection proved to be more efficient comparing to other WAG, water alternating gas methods, and continuous gas injection. So in that strategy, so we had 20 injectors, and every, so red arrow represents a gas injector and blue was water. So every gas injector was followed by water injection. So the gas was kind of controlled by the water injection. And in every well, the water alternating gas was performed, meaning that for some period of time we injected gas, and then that injection fluid was changed to water, and so on for every well. Yes, so now I would like to briefly talk about kind of an Equinor's energy transition and how I'm involved in it. So here we can see the kind of Equinor strategy, or kind of what is our goal to be always safe, high value, and low carbon. And here is kind of more direct kind of goals, how to actually we can make this energy transition. So optimize between oil and gas, accelerate renewable energy, and develop a low carbon solutions, which mainly involve CCS and hydrogen. So working as a reservoir engineer for one of the offshore fields in the Norwegian continental shelf, part of some of my tasks are involving to analyzing and kind of trying to optimize the offshore installations. So an offshore platform, we have different compressors, pumps, turbines, and all of them are emitting CO2 while we are producing. So kind of my goal is to trying to find an optimum solution, how we can still produce the same amount of oil and gas and reduce carbon emissions. So for example, maybe we can reduce some pumps for the injection, and then but still produce the same amount of oil but reduce carbon emissions. Yes, and now I would like to quickly talk about our project, our kind of now main project in the UK. It's a Northern Endurance Partnership where BP is an operator, and we are partners with National Grid, Shell, Total, and Eni. So the main idea and kind of goal of this project is to collect the CO2 from the Tees side and the Humber side, and transfer it through the pipelines to the Triassic saline aquifer located in the UK continental shelf, and inject it at approximately rate of 15 million tons per year. And this project is planned to be started the late of 2026. And in the future, there are potential opportunities to expand to the more subsurface places. And here just my last slide about kind of our Equinor's CCS and hydrogen projects and portfolio. So in the next 4 or 5 years, we are planning to perform many different projects, starting from Northern Lights, Northern Endurance Partnership, doing some general screening in the North Sea Basin, and some post-combustion, yes, the Net Zero Teesside, and a clean hydrogen portfolio. So Hydrogen Norway project, Zero Carbon Humber, some projects in the Northwest Europe, and in the North H2 project in Holland. So yes, thank you very much for listening, and yes, I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alhens, for your presentation. It's always wonderful to have different and contrasting views shared by you in terms of how Equinor is approaching energy transition and sort of how you are involved within it. And I hope Rishi might have something to come back at you, because well, his company is also embarking on a tremendous quest, and it's obviously wonderful to have both of you tonight. We have one final speaker left for tonight, and let me please introduce him. So Max Richards is currently the energy transition and training lead at Oilfield Production Consultants. Prior to starting this role, Max obtained a Master in Science degree in Environmental Geoscience from the University College London. Max's project was a preliminary study in collaboration with Carbfix in Iceland, as well as Aramco, where he focused on development and implementation of novel carbon capture and storage technology. His technical expertise focuses on geochemistry and processes that leverage carbon capture and storage. So Max, you're more than qualified to speak about energy transition. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Davis. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? A lot of big words in there, but I'll try and simplify as best as possible. Thank you for organising the SPD talk. Yeah, it's been quite fun putting together a presentation. So I'm going to try and share my screen now, and I'm going to put it in full screen mode. You have to tell me if you can. Is that all right? Can you see this okay?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so I'm mainly going to talk about my sort of short career so far, compared to a lot of the other speakers who are fascinating stories, by the way. My story is a little bit shorter. I only graduated last year, but I'm hoping that you would never be able to tell that. So I'm going to talk about university, the experience, and the skills that I developed there. I'm going to talk about my master's project and how it put me into this sort of industry. And the key thing is I'm going to talk about networking, a little bit of the other side of, okay, you can have the technical know-how, but it's about putting it in the right place. And then I'm just going to talk about my net zero career and energy transition. So a little funny photo to start with. On the left was a field trip. I mean, I'm hopefully talking to a lot of petroleum geoscientists and geologists. So you've been on lots of field trips, you know what they're like. So on the left, we went to Carboneras in Spain in 2019 on a geology field trip. So how did I go from that to this on the right? I started work for OPC. A little bit about OPC just to contextualize. So OPC is a subsurface consultancy. So we are an oil field services company. So we support oil and gas and some renewable companies, and actually a few other sort of sectors doing whatever they want to do, mainly technical subsurface, but we supply consultants, we do training, all sorts of different stuff. So I went to UCL, I did an integrated Masters of Science. So that's essentially a 4-year integrated degree, but you do a master's project. It's just commercially a lot more viable than doing an independent master's. So it mainly focused on earth sciences and geology, where there was a core element of sustainability that was sort of self-driven. I did a bit of economics as well, a bit of geography, a bit of social science. So I wanted to have a holistic perspective on my education, and yeah. And I did a master's project as well. I've got some highlights from the degree. They're mainly field trips. On the left, as you see, my fashion sense got a lot better. They weren't my glasses, but this was one of the only photos I could find. I went to the Durness in Scotland field trip, September 2017, mainly looking at thrust belts. On the right is Pyrenees, so that was a mountain building field trip. Some great stories from all of these. And what I want these messages to convey, the purpose of them, is that I've always been really passionate about the world. I'm really interested in it and explaining the processes that govern it. And then subsequently after that, I did a geological mapping project, so an independent mapping project. I'm sure many of you have done something similar over the course of 4 weeks in Carrickfell in the Lake District. Geologically quite boring, but I learned a lot, and it was very useful for my independent development and being able to put together large projects and deal with large data sets. So I'd heavily encourage anyone to try and do as much fieldwork as possible. And then in late 2018, I met David Attenborough. He opened the KLB, which is the Kathleen Lonsdale building, which is the Earth Science building at UCL. A lot of acronyms, a lot of big words, but it's really simple. Asking him a question, the UCL department named, I think, some sort of fossil after him, some sort of phytoplankton that was around a long time ago. I'm not so good on geological periods. It's been a long time now. And this is probably my favorite photo ever. Another field trip picture, but this time we went to Southeast Spain, Beatix. So that was a Basin Evolution field trip. This is the same place as the Indiana Jones film. If you remember, with the umbrella, he puts the birds in the air and then they fly into the airplane. great film. But I wanted to bring this up as well. So then in 2020, I went to the Deccan Traps in Goa. I was doing my master's project at the time. I was doing on carbonate mineralization. I'll talk about this a little bit more down the line. But the purpose of this trip was to collect some rocks for a potential PhD project. But this was in February 2020, before it all went wrong, as you would say. So I'll just talk a little bit about my master's project and what I did. I did it with Professor Eric Olkers, who is a big name in carbon capture and storage. I assessed a suite of rocks, the mafic and ultramafic rocks of the Western Red Sea in Saudi Arabia, for subsurface carbonate mineralization, which is a form of carbon capture and storage. And on the right, you can see a photo of me with a mask on, the 27th of January, 2020. Ahead of the curve, might I say. I was crushing up some rocks really finely because the purpose of my master project was I had some samples. I was crushing them and I had to prevent them basically breathing them in because they were so fine, because I was dissolving them. So why did I do my master project with carbon capture and storage? Well, as I sort of touched on with all the photos, I've been a bit obsessed with the world and exploring the world and trying to explain it and understand it as best as possible. I wanted to make a positive contribution to solve key issues such as climate change and sustainability, but I wanted to do it in a way that felt really tangible to real life projects and having a direct impact, something to do with industry. I always wanted to be a consultant, doing sort of general consultancy, because I get quite bored quite easily. So I wanted to work on a range of projects and be able to do some innovative things. And here's the funny part, really. We talk really, networking is the key thing here. This is something that you can create a huge amount of value for yourself and other people. And I'll tell this story, kind of, it loops back to around the end of the presentation. So I was working at the Pineapple Pub, which is in Kentish Town in northwest London, when I was a student. It was one evening, I remember it distinctively. I was talking with the people around the bar, as you do, about what I should do my master's project on. This was a bit before, I think this was August 2019, just before I had to choose. And someone who was at the bar, so funnily enough, worked in the oil and gas industry. And they recommended that I do my project on carbon capture and storage because it was making noise in the industry. So I took their business card at the time and I got chatting and I decided to do my master's project on carbon capture storage. So I'll tell you just a little bit about that. So I touched on this slightly earlier, but there's a suite of rocks lovingly provided by Saudi Aramco from Jazan, Saudi Arabia, on the Arabian Shield. And I did a geochemical and mineralogical assessment of the rocks, essentially. So I did XRD, ICP-MS, and OES. So it's just elemental analysis of what's in the rocks. I wanted to understand what was in the rocks. And then as I touched on earlier, I dissolved all of the rocks in quite a strong acid. And we measured the reactants of the rocks and the products of that chemical reaction, because then I could work out, it would sort of be analogous with the real world conditions. And then I did some geochemical modeling and I wanted to see if carbon capture and storage, a very novel form, would work. So I'll just tell you a little bit about carbonate mineralization. It's very simple. So long story short, you put carbon dioxide and water together, you make fizzy water. It's relatively acidic, pH 3, on the grand scheme of things, not that acidic, but it will dissolve rocks. And when you're looking at very specific rocks, so basalt, you can see on the right, there's a little diagram there. So when you combine carbonic acid, which is the fizzy water, you dissolve some of the rocks, and there'll be certain constituents in rocks that are key here. They're called divalent metal cations, but for simplicity's sake, we're looking at things like calcium, magnesium, and iron. And so when you rip the rock apart, you've got these divalent metal cations floating around in the water, and you've also got the carbonates, not the carbonates, sorry, the thing before that. Essentially the CO2 that's fixated in carbonic acid form, so CO3. That combines with the divalent metal cations, and you make new minerals, namely calcite, magnesite, and siderite. So you chemically fixate CO2 as a mineral forever, essentially, unless they're dissolved subsequently in some bizarre reaction that no one's found out yet. So the key thing here with this form of carbon capture and storage is that the risk of leak is essentially completely mitigated, but it only works at very specific conditions. So you need the right rocks with the right constituents. So you want lots of calcium, magnesium, and iron, so you can make lots of carbonates. And then you also want good permeability, good porosity, so you can have a lot of contact and increase the reactant area. So very shortly, I tried to make this as in English as possible because it looks quite alien, but essentially what I found was that the capacity for storage was about 140 megatons of CO2, which is similar to the Hamilton field in Liverpool Bay, what they're doing with HyNet, the HyBert project. So there's an ample amount of room. Mineralization was occurring within 2 years of injection. So one of the reasons why carbonate mineralization doesn't really occur in depleted oil and gas fields and saline aquifers is because you have the wrong rocks and you don't have a good availability of that right rock type. But in this case, you have perfect conditions. So in the instance you have perfect conditions, this can happen quite quickly. The Freaksea is a piece of geochemical modeling software that you might come across. It indicated that there was a little correlation between the amount of the products and the reactants. And say, well, that doesn't really make sense, does it? But we had a look at the mineralogy, and we just realized it was kind of understated. The rocks were hydrothermically altered, and it was a little bit, I could talk about the technicalities of this for a long time, but I've got a limited period of time, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. I've got some graphs here. It's quite hard to communicate what essentially happened, but what you think would happen happened, and that's what I wanted the graphs to communicate. But there's some interesting geochemistry in here, and if any of you are geochemists, probably a bit more qualified to talk on this than me, I would be happy to hear that outside of this talk. But I'm going to talk about resilience and getting a job in COVID-19. So this was an email sent from my master's supervisor about the middle of March, talking about the virus. This is when it was all very novel and before anything was realized, and we didn't quite get the scope of the COVID pandemic. And then, of course, about a week later, all of the universities closed. This was in the middle of my master's project, which, while I had, was very lab heavy. And essentially, we got the email that we were getting shut down and we had to go home. But as we all know, what happened. So that's painting the picture. This was March last year, and I was in the middle of my master's project. But anyway, I graduated a couple of months later after I got my master's project out. This is the oil price of when I graduated. It's not great, but this is really talking about networking. And so a lot of the traditional options in my mind were, what am I going to do for a job? How am I going to get one? So for me, it was, do I work in an oil and gas company? Maybe. Do I work for a consultancy? That would be ideal. But how am I going to, with this oil price, is anything going to happen? But I was very happy. I got 75% of my master's project. It was one of the highest in my year. My graduation has been indefinitely postponed, I think until next year now. This is the third postponement. But well, I'm here, aren't I? So something must have happened. So going back to networking. So the oil and gas professional who recommended that I do my master's in carbon capture and storage, well, he gave me his business card. And through the job application process last sort of autumn after summer, I reached out to that person and I made contact with them, and we had a few chats, and I did a presentation on my master's thesis, and somehow managed to convince them to give me a job. And I joined OPC in February 2021, which has been, I think, about 5 months now. And yeah, it's been interesting. So as you can see, there's a map on the right, and the pineapple is just down the road. Been a few times since starting at OPC, but strictly for client meetings since COVID requirements have been relaxed. So I'm currently the energy transition and training lead. My bread and butter projects that we work on are carbon capture and storage. We've done 4, and I'm working on the 5th one now, which is sort of a commercialization study. So it's all good having this technical know-how, but how are you going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? And I'm sure BP and Equinor will probably touch on that with the business models, looking at their clusters. We'll be doing a lot of that. We've also been translating net zero guidance in the UKCS for clients, doing some greenhouse gas monitoring, verification and reporting. But as I said, it's mainly carbon capture and storage. We're doing the technical, the commercial, and we also do training. So I talk to a lot of people and try and make things work. And I really see that, emphasize the value of networking and just being able to talk to anyone, because you have no idea who you're talking to and where it may lead. So you take every opportunity that you can and recognize that the traditional routes that you think are right, so for example, going through a graduate scheme at an oil and gas company, they're not necessarily that's not the only path. There are a lot of ways of getting your foot in the door. And I think once you do, you learn to be a self-starter and you learn to be innovative. So there are lots of different paths you can take. I'm also doing energy transition strategy, looking at sort of advisory roles rather than strictly technical, supporting our clients in implementing these strategies, looking at electrification, doing projects like that. So there's a world of stuff out there, and I think most people who are graduating, or the young professionals now, will have that experience, will have that in mind. And if you don't already have that experience, it's very easy to get it. I just recommend signing up for basically every newsletter under the sun and attending lots of different events. That's a good way of learning lots of different information. And yeah, I think the real thing that I'm trying to put across is networking, but don't be diminished in going the energy transition path. It's a good way to work on a diverse range of projects, meet lots of different people, and a lot of people have a lot of energy towards this industry, and capturing that is really key, trying to stay on to the next best thing. So yeah, thank you very much. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, you've got my email there. You'll probably find me on LinkedIn as well. And I invite any questions at the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Max, for pulling together such a broad-ranging presentation, especially putting emphasis on the importance of networking and also giving us a good refresher in terms of the pictures that you selected for the presentation. Definitely a good refresher, at least to me. I hope for others as well.
Yeah, I hope it was informative.
Well, it was it was informative. It was. So we are currently moving to the second stage of our event tonight, and I can already see that there are questions coming in from the audience. We have prepared some as well, and I would like to make a quick start with them, and then we'll also take the ones that you have already posted in the chat box. And Rishi, I will come back to you and to your transition so far, and you mentioned that you wanted to get rid of to get out of your comfort zone and sort of explore other opportunities that were in BP. And I just wanted to know how important soft skills were in your journey, and what key lessons did you learn, and what could you share to other young professionals so that they could become very networking and also capitalize on the business opportunity that is out there right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Davis. I think with all of these things, if you think about how you transfer your skills across, you can go two ways. There's your technical skills that can transfer across. And I think Max, for example, showed very much so how a geologist can actually work in the space as a geologist without thinking about the soft skills. And then, of course, there's the whole host of skills that you learn around your technical discipline, around the soft skills, as you put it, Davis. So, and I mentioned a few examples before, your ability to handle uncertainty, your ability to solve complex 3D problems. We're all ultimately working in some form of business development, whether it's an oil and gas or your low carbon energy businesses, and actually identifying value, seeing how you can operationalize it, and seeing how you can, and end up making this a viable business proposition. So I think all of these things, this commercial acumen, will be useful regardless of where you work, and it's important not to lose sight of that. And then going back to the technical skills, I gave the examples when I spoke before. Your geologists can work in CCS, your engineers can work, it doesn't matter what you're building. Ultimately, you're building complex engineering projects, mega projects, whether it's an oil facility or an offshore wind farm or a solar farm, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it's the same skills that get drawn on. And ultimately, if we think about the reason why our industry will thrive, because one of the questions we often get in BP as far as the energy transition goes is, why your company, why your industry? Why don't we just shift the focus? Why don't you get a low carbon provider to just do this work? And why don't you just shut down your services because the world doesn't need your products? And actually, that's a very extreme view in terms of the example I gave. But the key thing here is the transferable aspect, not just of our technical skills, but as an industry, the skills that we can transfer across. If you think about it, we have the right relationships, we have the right capabilities, the skills, the reach, this global ability to solve complex problems. And you can argue that that's the company's skill set, but if you look into the heart of it, that's the people and what the people bring. And so without the people, you don't have the same advantage to actually get after the transition in the same way. Yeah, I think I'll give others a chance to speak as well. I know some of the others gave some really compelling arguments as well for how these things can go across. But I think it's important just not to lose sight of this fact and to embrace what you have and what you have to offer and leverage it because there's a role for all of us in this. And actually, sorry, I'm going to make one final point, and that's on the point on just transition. So just transition is essentially the concept of how do we take people along with us on this journey, and we're talking about it from an employee point of view, but it's not just employees we're talking about here with the energy transition. You can think about the communities who rely on oil and gas projects, the countries whose economies run on oil and gas exports. There's a lot of aspects of our society that are fundamentally currently reliant on the oil and gas industry, either through our operations, through the products that we bring to market. And ultimately, you need to bring all of these aspects along with you as we transition. So it's really important in creating the right incentives for companies to actually take their people along with us. I think policy plays a role there. I know Asaminia spoke to a great extent on the role of policy in all of this. So I think this is it's a global problem, and I think it's important that we all come together to address it.
I think, yeah, I completely agree with you, Rishi. I think it's about not being narrow-minded about what is out there for you, and sort of being brave enough, sort of first of all realizing that, and then also capitalizing on the opportunity that is there out for you. Thank you for that. Asmania, moving on to you. You touched upon the fact that you had sort of experienced working in a team that sort of tried to address a project about energy markets in Asia. And since you are related with the legislation side of energy transition, I thought that the audience might be interested about learning more about the current policy and legislation hurdles that you think are the most important ones out there, and how do you think, where do you see there an opportunity for young professional to get involved and maybe try to address that side of energy transition?
Yeah, thank you, Davis. So I think that as we discussed, the energy transition is an evolving area, evolving topic. So there is still some unclarity, uncertainty as to what is happening, what will happen in the future, and maybe not so much for people working on the sector, but like for governments in emerging markets or companies in emerging markets. So this is always a challenge when you're trying to develop a new legislation, because there is a lot of reluctancy, I would say, from companies or from consumers or the governments themselves. So I think it's very important for young professionals and for the countries that we are discussing about to start educating themselves, learning more about climate change, learning more about sustainability, why this is important, why we need to work to act as soon as possible. And at the same time, I really believe that for companies, especially, the fact that there is a risk for job losses and a financial risk at the same time, it's another big challenge, and what is keeping them behind in terms of implementing and accepting new legislation. Because even if as a company you want to adapt and you want to change and you want to make it a safe to renewable energy or cleaner energy, and you have customers, consumers that they are asking for carbon intensive products, this might be an obstacle for the company to commit to net zero and commit to this transition. So all these are the main challenges that are being faced by regulators, policymakers all around the world, especially in emerging markets and developing countries, that they might not even know what climate change and sustainability is. It's not the same being in the UK or in the EU, where everyone is somehow prepared of what is happening and what will happen. Yeah, and I think for all of us, for young professionals, it's the same. We are the generation that will have the opportunity to train, to educate other people, to prepare other countries for what is coming, and this is like a big opportunity, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, and to add further on your point, I believe that a big area where young professionals could get involved in terms of the policy and legislation side of energy transition is sort of emissions reporting, but not sort of only based on one company or one country, but the global emissions reporting, which, as far as I know, is also going to be a big debate in the upcoming COP26 in November. So
Yeah.
not only sort of realizing that sort of young professionals can get in the get involved in the policy side, sort of in countries that maybe are not up to the speed of energy transition, but also sort of realizing that emissions reporting is a vast area where one can get sort of get into.
Yeah, it is very important, and it will become even more important and even mandatory in the UK and the EU in the following years. So this is, of course, something we need to take into consideration.
Okay, and speaking about emissions, IAE recently released a net zero roadmap, which was sort of met with large skepticism about the professionals in oil and gas industry, about the need to halt any new investment in projects around the world, in particular in fossil fuel related projects. And Max, since you tried to construct a broad presentation, I would like to know how do you view this sort of report, and how do you think this can impact the young professional first working in the oil and gas industry, and also how it might impact maybe somebody who is in early career and might contemplate about sort of undertaking a transition as well?
Well, it's an interesting report. It's controversial for a good few reasons, but there are a lot of perspectives you can take essentially on your question. I would say the writing's on the wall. I would say someone who's looking to go into oil and gas, think, why go into oil and gas and then transition? There are other ways of entering now. I mean, look at the roles that I'm doing, the role that Rishi's doing. Couldn't you just do that from the beginning? I mean, Imperial College has stopped offering petroleum engineering and geoscience as the masters, and they're doing subsurface energy. So I think the industry is going in that way, and the leaders, people like Imperial, who are being innovative, will take it as it is. But I mean, it's ridiculous as well, because just today we're producing a gigawatt of electricity from coal. Yeah, we still need oil and gas, but I don't know, I just think the IEA is a little bit unrealistic, because there are nearly 2 billion people in India, and the continent of Africa is growing rapidly, and as much as you can leapfrog with technology, with solar and wind, there are still energy demands that need to be met. But I think in essence the report is touching on the idea that there is enough oil and gas in the ground. We don't really need to find any more, but it depends on how the future rolls out. I mean, it's anyone's guess. We can try and model it as much as possible. The famous quote is, what is it? All models are bad, but some are useful. And so it should be met with some skepticism, but I mean, it reinforces the point that the world is changing, and you should try and be a part of that change, or there are fears of being left behind, or fears of being made irrelevant. And nobody wants that. So that's kind of my perspective on it. It's very challenging. It's a very challenging report, and it should scare some people, but it should also provide some people with a bit of hope. It depends on your perspective. But that's a conversation for another time.
Okay, and maybe you could also sort of quickly just say, how do you think, how dramatic might be the change in mindset amongst the young professionals?
Well, I think that mindset has already happened. For me at university, this was a year ago, working for an oil and gas company was equivalent to working for a cigarette company. It was like a no-go. Do not work for an oil and gas company. It's just, it's sacrilegious. Don't do it. It's bad. They're bad. But that was my experience, because I did a general geology degree. So but then there are still people going into oil and gas now. and they're needed. And specifically, you know, if you're looking at national oil companies, need to develop young talent and to be able to, as Rishi said about having a just transition, you have to be able to share some of those skills. But as I think we've all demonstrated, those skills could be used for other things. So the core skill set is there, but does it have to be necessarily orientated towards being a petroleum engineer or petroleum or reservoir engineering, for example? Those key skills can be very easily utilized for other things.
Sure, I agree. And
as we've demonstrated.
Yeah, and so my first impression when I read this report was sort of what is going to happen in Middle East, because most of those economies are based on sort of pulling in new investments in developing fields, and sort of I knew it would be taken a little bit differently in the developed world, but it is quite controversial, and I was glad to hear your opinion on that. I know that there are questions related directly to Elhans from chat, and Lyth would be happy to sort of pose them. And Lyth, I will hand it over to you, because I can see that there are questions coming in from audience, and I believe there was one particular for Elhans as well. So
Yeah.
the floor is yours.
Thanks, Davis. Before we move on to the questions, honestly, I was wondering if maybe Rishi or Elhans would comment on the roadmap that Max was speaking about. It would be interesting to see the different insights.
Are you referring to the IEA?
Yeah.
Lyth?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think Max made a point. So at BP, we also have our energy outlook scenarios. So I think there's a number of these scenarios that are being forecasted. And ultimately, nobody has a crystal ball, I'd say. They're all based on a number of assumptions. And then the scenario is a way of articulating what the outcome might be given a number of assumptions. And, you know, Max also said all models are wrong, but some are useful. And in this case, actually, it's very useful having these kinds of scenarios, not just to forecast on what you need to do, but also to be a catalyst in providing a bit of clarity on what actually needs to happen. Because it's all well and good with these giant problems, you know, it's easy to get bogged down on how you begin, but actually it's critical to get started. I think in terms of some insights on how I kind of approach this, I think firstly, and the IEA scenario, by the way, still acknowledges this, is oil and gas will still remain part of the mix for a long time to come, albeit it will take a smaller share, and it will need to be produced in a way where it can be decarbonized and it can be done responsibly. And I think, you know, IEA acknowledged that in their report. I think the discussion here is more about there needing to be lower investment in oil and gas. In a world consistent with the scenario, but lower investment, but still an investment. So I think that's a key point. I think they forecast around $170 billion per annum by 2030 is what's needed globally. And I think the way we approach it in BP, you know, our strategy is to actually reduce our production by about 40% in that time frame. We've already said we're no longer exploring in new countries. And actually, if you look at our exploration budget over the past 10 years or so, it's dramatically reduced today to what it was back say about 10 or 15 years ago. So I think it's consistent with our approach in terms of how we look at this. And I think the second thing to think about here is IEA suggests it needs just an unprecedented jump in the amount of investment in low carbon technology. I think they forecast $5 trillion a year, I think, by 2030. We're currently around $2 trillion. And I think more than anything, that helps articulate the opportunity that comes with the energy transition. You know, if there's trillions of dollars that are going to be spent on something, that's a tremendous opportunity for value creation. And so, you know, it's an opportunity to grow new revenue streams, a way to diversify your portfolio, and thereby also reducing your risk. And so again, I think it's in line with how we approach the transition, and it doesn't really, you know, it doesn't cast any surprises in that regard. But I think ultimately we need action to make all of this happen. The IEA are great in helping provide some of this clarity of thought, I think, which is key because they're a great organization with some very valuable insights. And we need to ensure all parties play a role, you know, because it's not just about companies, it needs countries, it needs consumers, it needs companies to all come together. So I think if anything, it also highlights the role of policy in all of this as just the magic thread in creating the right framework to just collectively drive action in the right way. So I think that's the point there. I think just one other point I'd like to make also is on just this notion of when we talk net zero and when we talk low carbon versus oil and gas, it's very easy to get bogged down into a conversation of there are green companies and there are brown companies. Frankly, people approach it in a binary way, in good or bad, you know, and actually, I think we need to realize IEA it's a scenario of transition. This is a period of transition. It's not just green or brown. There's greening on that journey too. And so I think we need to just recognize that we need companies to be on that journey, and we need to support the companies that are greening. You know, companies who've got the desire to change, who've got the skills to change, who have the resources needed to change and credible plans to change. So it's really important to support these companies, because if you think about the Paris goals, and IEA is all about 1.5, you're not going to get after the Paris goals unless you bring, if I'm crude about it, the emitters along with you. You know, it's all well and good supporting and going after the green companies, but you need to transition the brown companies. You need these greening companies to actually get there. And if I give one analogy on that, you know, I would think of the automotive sector. You've got Tesla, great company. I don't think people think of Tesla as a car company. They think about them as a technology company, frankly, pioneers in that space. Tesla have been great in shifting sentiment towards electrification for the broader industry. But I mean, how many cars do Tesla sell a year? I think they sell about 500,000 cars a year. And so it's all well and good Tesla changing and people supporting Tesla. But unless you have a company like Ford or GM who sell millions of cars a year to change, you're not going to drive that change. So I think as we think about transition, you need to think about supporting and encouraging greening companies, not just green or brown.
That's a great answer, Rishi. Thank you. And obviously, everyone has to come together. And speaking of that, we got a question from Russell Smith. He says, what would be the YP's, the young professionals, advice to someone about to begin a board advisory role with a new startup in the energy transition space, focusing on CCUS? Maybe Max, you would take that, considering your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just read the question again. I think it was from Russell. What advice would a young person give to someone who's about to be on a board advisory role with a new startup? Okay, with energy on CCUS. So the biggest problems you'll run into with CCUS is the money side. People will say, well, who's going to pay for it? That's the biggest problem. So in an advisory role, I'd recommend you dedicate your time to working out the regulation and the business models globally. You can have a look at the UK. There's great examples coming from BEIS. There was an update in May with the original position outlined in December 2020. So that's a good place to start. And recently there was an organization, I saw it on LinkedIn, a group of industry bodies about getting accredited, because CCS, if you're storing carbon dioxide, it's actually not accredited as a carbon removal system, as it, like, you can't get money for it. You can't get credits for it. So there is an organization going through that. And then I would say the most important thing is get up to scratch on emissions trading schemes. So the main one would be the EU ETS, so the European ETS emission trading scheme, also the UK one, and the New Zealand one. So that is essentially, I'm sure everyone is aware what ETS is, but that's essentially the price of polluting 1 ton of carbon dioxide. If a carbon capture and storage project can get accredited for removing that and get money back, because you can sell the credits on the market, thank you, Europe, setting that up, you can, that's the profit, that is the way of the business model. You've got, unfortunately, the price of polluting is too low and the price of carbon capture and storage is too high. There'll be a confluence at some point, as BEIS has outlined in the Industrial Strategy Decarbonisation document. At that point, you can start making money out of it. But there are a lot of ways of thinking about this. I mean, it's up to you, really. Good luck. That's what I'd say. Just get up to date on everything and stay up to date, because it changes very quickly.
Yeah, surely does every day.
Yeah, and if anyone knows anything about business models, please talk to me, because I'm still finding it very confusing.
Okay, now let's move our attention to Elhans. I recall you talked about the Northern Endurance Project. Maybe Rishi would comment on that as well. In terms of the storage capacity, what does it represent for the UK as a, aspiring CCS hub?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, so I think, in my opinion, yes, in that project, yes, in that project we can store a lot of CO2 underground and permanently. And yes, so I think this is quite important project. And actually, so how I understand from reading some news that actually, so government is supporting, UK government is supporting this project. And yes, probably Rishi has more to say about this project.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so while I don't bring the specifics on this, but I think if we look at or what you call the NEP, or how we approach it, Net Zero Teesside project, it's a real pioneer in just proving this concept of how our industry can work with other industries to form a cluster and actually get CCUS scaled up and into action. You know, with all of these things, when you think about technology projects, you need the proof of concept to be delivered to actually show that these things can be done, and it needs to work across sectors and across industries. So I think Net Zero Teesside is great for that. I think it's a great showcasing case study for the UK as we host COP26 as well, just in terms of how you can bring different parties to the table to do this. And it gives a bit of a model for how this thing can be rolled out you know, at a larger scale in the longer run. So I think it's great in that regard. It's a really valuable case study, and let's just keep an eye on how things go and hope these kind of things can be replicated elsewhere.
Okay, great. A follow-up on that maybe. At the moment, there are only so many technical energy transition jobs in things like CCS, hydrocarbon, you know, and hydrogen, apologies, and renewables, even in big companies such as BP and Equinor. So how easy is it for technical professionals to get exposure, even in their daily oil and gas jobs? Maybe, Max, you'd give us a consultancy viewpoint on this, Elhans as well?
Sure. How to get technical experience working on energy transition? Well, it's very difficult, as you said, because I mean, I try and sell technical experience, technical expertise to everyone, and it's quite difficult. Been lucky, done a few, but open to more, by the way. Getting exposure, I mean, it's just challenging. You need to understand the fundamental concepts, and you need to have something to add in meetings. That's how you're going to engage with people. You need to know what you're talking about. And so when the opportunity does come, because a lot of the people you'll be engaging with, senior professionals in the oil and gas industry, might not have very much exposure, if any, to energy transition projects, specifically when you're working with smaller companies or medium size as well, even large. So know what you're talking about and be ready to add value and be ready to, you know, push the conversation and say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Do you understand how this affects this? That's what I would say. I mean, if you're interested in it, it will naturally occur.
Elhans, I remember you spoke about CO2 emissions as a reservoir engineer for Equinor. So perhaps they support staff to get involved in energy transition?
Yes, exactly. Actually, yes, I wanted to say yes. I agree completely with Max said, and yes, I think the young professionals and other engineers and all like petroleum technology professionals, they should be just open-minded. If you're interested, there always will be an opportunity to participate in this energy transition. And actually, yes, as Max mentioned, the technology is the same. That kind of working as a reservoir engineer, you can work, you can get some skills in geothermal, in CCS. Still, kind of, you need to transport these fluids into the ground and later to monitor if there's no any leakages. So I think yes, our skills definitely can be employed in the energy transition projects and jobs. Yes.
Okay, great. As we're reaching the end of the event, I would like to ask all of you maybe to bring a comment for everyone as a counter idea, all the professionals that are looking to stay in the oil and gas industry. Like, what advice would you give them?
Rishi, could you maybe
Sure.
your insight?
Yeah, no, happy to. Look, I think firstly, it's great, Leif and Davis, that you host these kinds of events. I think this is clearly something that's on people's minds. This affects both people who are in the industry and, I think, as Max shared, people considering entering the industry. So we need to be mindful of that. I would go back to my fundamentals of look at the skills that you have to offer. They're a lot broader than you think. But actually at the heart of it, the industry needs those skills, and actually talent attraction is a big deal. It's a significant priority for companies. Max, again, I'm reacting to your comment that people associated joining an oil and gas company with joining a tobacco company. You know, that's the world we appear to be living in now, at least in the West. And I think it's important to not lose sight of the geographical differences. Asaminio, I think you mentioned this too. It's easy for us sitting here in London, which is frankly the epicenter of the climate debate, and think, well, actually, this is all about low carbon. It's a very different story if you look in other parts of the world, and particularly with areas of energy poverty, where priorities are very different. You know, if you don't have the ability to keep the lights on to do your homework, or to have the gas to cook your food, or you know, to keep your hospitals powered, your priorities are very different. Having said that, does that mean they don't care about climate change? Absolutely not. I think these things manifest themselves in different ways. For example, you know, if we think of Beijing in China, they might not think of it from the climate change point of view, but you might think about it from the point of view of air quality and pollution. So I think this is a global problem and it needs global solutions. But I think coming back to everyone on this call, this is an industry embarking upon massive change. I think there is this near-term uncertainty, and sure, everyone's going to worry about how does this impact my job. But ultimately, we need this industry to thrive. It plays a significant role, and we can't achieve all of the outcomes we want to achieve without it. So I think persevere. I think create the opportunities for yourself. Speak to the right people. These conversations are happening everywhere. And frankly, you know, when I think about how I have transitioned into my role, it wasn't really defined as a role in the past. So it's not like there's an incumbent position that will take it. These are new roles that are being created, and they're there for the taking. So just be mindful of what's going on and jump into opportunities as they come.
Let me just jump in quickly and just add to Rishi's comments. I created my role as well. There was no advertisement. I convinced my boss to give it to me and made apparently a very compelling argument why he needed an energy transition lead, but it's all worked out. So I would, in essence, absolutely what Rishi said.
Alhans, maybe Asi, would you like to add a comment there?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Max and Rishi said. It's up to us and trying to stay in the industry. It's still part of the transition, as it's already mentioned. Oil and gas will be part of the energy mix for some years. So I think that there are opportunities. There are opportunities to stay and work in oil and gas. There are opportunities in oil and gas companies to do something similar, to help make it more sustainable, to help make it more clean and environmentally friendly. So definitely, I think there are opportunities as long as you're open-minded and ready to try and do your best.
Great.
Exactly, yes. Actually, yeah, just wanted to say the same comment as Asimene. I think definitely for the next 20, 30, 40 years, we still will need oil and gas. And if someone would like really to stay on that path and work as a petroleum drilling, of course, for our generation, at least, there will be, of course, a lot of opportunities. But I think everyone understands that yes, energy transition needs to be done. And yeah, just young professional needs to be open-minded, and if there is opportunity, we should take it and try to work to help the world to help this energy transition to happen.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here with us today. As I said before, we are delighted, and everyone, we've been receiving great comments for you guys. Thank you. So yeah, I think we'll not keep you guys any longer. We'll let you go. For those who watch the Euros, it's a big day for England and Scotland. So all the best, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
very much.
Great work.